Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the strong applause. Before I get started, I just want to thank the conference organizers, Mindy and Denisa, the whole conference planning committee, and of course Shakopee for hosting us here on your lands and your beautiful facility. It's been so good to be back in community with people and just talking with people and having those in-person connections that we've been missing. So thank you for all of that and the energy that you bring to your work every day. I am Erin Parker, and I am, as Denisa said, the Executive Director of the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative. And if you don't know anything about us, we were founded in 2013, and we exist to be a resource for all tribal nations and Native producers who are working in the space of food and agriculture. So we do quite a few projects across the food system, but the one that I'm going to talk to you about today is our role as the research partner to the Native Farmville Coalition, which is the largest ever coordinated effort in Indian country around federal food, agriculture, and nutrition policy. So I'm going to start with a little bit of an overview of the Native Farmville Coalition. I think Lexi was making the rounds earlier today and passing out buttons. So if you didn't get a button, she's jingling the bag, so that means there are a few buttons left. So if you would like a button, let Lexi know. I know she wants to give those out before she goes home. The Native Farmville Coalition, if you were here Monday for our opening session and you heard Chairman Anderson from Shakopee, Midwakut, and Sioux community speak about the work that Shakopee has done and the investment Shakopee's made historically in Indian country agricultural policy, a lot of that work really that he spoke about centered around the work of the Native Farmville Coalition, and Shakopee was absolutely instrumental in beginning that work. That work began in 2017 with the Regaining Our Future report, which you can see here on your screen. I also think we have a very well-loved copy making the rounds somewhere. Lexi had one. It's got lots of post-it notes and tabs in it, so you can definitely tell that we're big ag nerds and we love to read about ag policy. And thank you, by the way, for waking up with ag policy this morning. I know that always gets me excited, and I hope by the time I'm done talking, you're excited as well. But back in 2017, my organization, IFAI, wrote the Regaining Our Future report, which was commissioned by Shakopee, and after that worked with Shakopee as well as the National Congress of American Indians and the Intertribal Agriculture Council to formally form the Native Farmville Coalition. Since that time, the coalition has grown. By the time the 2018 Farm Bill was passed, there were over 100 tribal members of the coalition, and today I'm really excited to share that there are over 270 members of the coalition, and as you can see on the screen, most of those members are tribal nations. 170 member tribal nations in the Native Farmville Coalition, along with intertribal organizations, Native organizations, and even ally organizations, all coming together to speak with one unified voice, making sure that Indian country has a strong presence and Native voices are heard in the federal legislation that shapes our country's food and agriculture policy. I also wanted to note before I dig into the Farm Bill that we will have a sequel to Regaining Our Future. As Chairman Anderson mentioned on Monday, that will be coming out later this year. IFAI has wrapped up the drafting phase along with our partners at Intertribal Agriculture Council and NCAI, and it is over to Shakopee, who is graciously doing the amazing layout and communications work on it. So you'll see that later this year, and I am really excited to be able to hand that to you in person because I'm a big nerd and I love giving people beefy reports about federal policy. So I hope you love receiving them. The Farm Bill itself, before I talk about what's happening in the Farm Bill process for 2023, I should probably talk to you about what the Farm Bill is, in case you didn't know. This is the single largest piece of federal legislation that shapes food, agriculture, and nutrition policy for our entire country. And when I say large, I mean that in multiple ways. I mean it in terms of the length of the law itself. It's well over 1,000 pages of legislation when all is said and done. It's also over 12 titles spanning everything from nutrition policy to crop insurance and other risk mitigation strategies for Native producers, conservation programming, forestry programming. All of that is contained in the Farm Bill. I also mean largest in terms of the amount of money that Congress appropriates for this bill every 5 years when the bill is passed. In 2018, that meant $428 billion of funding appropriated to USDA to help farmers, ranchers, and rural communities all across the United States be successful in agriculture and build thriving rural communities. And over 10 years, that spending amounts to about $867 billion. So when we say large, we really mean that in multiple ways. But unfortunately, even though this bill shapes food and agriculture policy for all of the United States, Indian country's been historically left out of this critical legislation. Farm bills began back in the 1930s. The very first Farm Bill was passed in 1933, so now you're ready for Jeopardy. It's the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933. And since 1933, every 5 years or so, Congress has passed another Farm Bill. They've grown and changed over time, but when it comes to Indian country, one thing historically remained true, and that was that Indian country was left out of this legislation. Those billions of dollars that have been flowing into USDA to flow into the hands of producers, farmers, ranchers, fishers, everyone across the country, rural communities, Indian country was left out of that process really until the late 90s and the early 2000s when we start to see a little bit of change. But the Native Farm Bill Coalition was formed to give Indian country a really strong voice in that process and ensure that Indian country was not left out again. And I'm really excited to share with you that worked, that speaking with one unified voice worked. In the 2018 Farm Bill process, 63 tribal-specific provisions were included in the 2018 Farm Bill. When the bill was signed, all of those provisions had been advocated for by Natives, for Natives. These provisions are positive. They are increasing access to funding at USDA, increasing access to training and infrastructure, to technical assistance and outreach, even programs that support more traditional and native-produced food production. They also really support, as you can see on the screen, and by the way, I should say, before you go on Pigeonhole and tell me that my math is bad, I know. I know the percentages here add up to well over 100%. The reason for that, we analyzed the law after the 2018 Farm Bill was passed to see and categorize these provisions and let you all know what these provisions do for tribal nations and tribal producers. And some provisions do multiple things, so that's why they add up to over 100%. So please use Pigeonhole to ask me questions, but I promise, I did go to law school because I'm bad at math, but I'm not that bad at math. There's a reason. There's a reason for it. But as you can see, 62% of those 63 provisions do something that's increasing tribal parity. And what we mean when we talk about parity is really just the power of words and language to make a huge difference in a very small way. We changed 2 words in a legal provision. We just add "and tribes" to programs within the Farm Bill, and that opens up opportunities for Indian country that had never existed before. And that's what those parity provisions do. They make it very clear to USDA through Congress in that legislation that tribal producers, that tribal communities, tribal governments have access to these particular programs. So that was a really big win for Indian country in the 2018 Farm Bill. The work in the Farm Bill doesn't just end, though, with the legislation, and the Native Farm Bill Coalition knows that. The work doesn't stop with getting those things into the law. The work continues working with USDA to make sure that all of those 63 tribal-specific provisions, and indeed all provisions in the Farm Bill, are enacted in a good way for Indian country, making sure that Native voices are heard throughout that process, that there's tribal consultation, that the programs are reaching Indian country in the way that they were intended to support communities. So the Native Farm Bill Coalition also maintains a Farm Bill implementation tracker that IFAI does to make sure those provisions are being implemented. Of the 63 provisions, only about 14 still need some attention at USDA, and I wanted to give you a little bit of an example of how that's going with the Tribal Advisory Committee. That was part of the miscellaneous title of the 2018 Farm Bill. It gives Indian country a direct voice to talk to the Department of Agriculture about ways to fix Indian country access to programs. One of the particular things about that committee that I was excited about when it passed is that it requires BIA to be at those meetings. I sat on the Council for Native American Farming and Ranching in its last couple of years at USDA. This is kind of the forerunner to the Tribal Advisory Committee, supposed to be advising the Secretary on better access to USDA programs for Indian country. BIA was supposed to be there, but they weren't legally required to be there. And in the 2 years that I sat on that committee, they didn't show up once. So legally requiring them to be there and work with USDA on fixing problems, especially access to conservation programs, is really, really critical. So implementing this committee is definitely something that the Native Farm Bill Coalition's been keeping an eye on since it was included in the 2018 Farm Bill. And most recently, this isn't the only NFBC action on this, but the most recent one is that the coalition did send a letter to Secretary Vilsack on May 3rd, encouraging him to implement this as well as all of the other 14 provisions that are still kind of lingering from the 2018 Farm Bill that impact Indian country. No matter what I do or how many times you quiz me, I will press the wrong button on the PowerPoint, so I'm really sorry about that. The stage managers and everyone on the production team have done a wonderful job. First, let's talk about Farm Bill 2023. And if you are watching my time and you note that I have 20 minutes remaining and you are thinking, she said there were 12 titles of the Farm Bill, is she going to try to do all 12 titles and all the priorities in 20 minutes? No. I got you. We're only going to talk about Title 4. That's the nutrition title. But before I do that, I want to give you some kind of broad-based policy priorities for 2023 from the Native Farm Bill Coalition, so you have kind of an idea of the buckets or categories that priorities are going to fall in across all 12 titles, and then we'll dig into nutrition. The biggest priority, again, increasing parity. We know there were 39 provisions where we add and tribes or and tribal producers, making it clear that tribal producers or tribal governments have access to USDA programs through the Farm Bill. There's still work to be done there. One of the examples of that is in the horticulture title with the specialty crop block grant program. That program provides funding to states who then provide funding to producers to support the production of specialty crops. And we know that so many indigenous produced foods, especially culturally appropriate foods and traditional foods, fall into or should fall into the category of specialty crops. But tribal governments are not afforded parity in this program, so they cannot access that funding to then give funding to tribal producers and really structure the specialty crop definitions in the way that might best suit tribal producers. If you are a tribal producer in the room, you can get access to this program, but unfortunately at the moment you do have to go through the state. So one of those places where parity is necessary is making sure tribes can also deliver this program, structure it in a little bit of a better way to open up access to tribal producers for indigenous produced specialty crops. Expanding self-governance is also a huge, broad, far-reaching priority of the coalition for 2023's Farm Bill. That includes 638 authority, and for anybody in the room who doesn't, most people I think will know what 638 authority is, but if you don't know, it's self-governance or self-determination authority. It allows tribal nations to step into running programs, services, activities, and functions of federal programming using federal dollars. It's a strong acknowledgement both of tribal sovereignty and of the federal trust responsibility that the federal government owes to tribal nations. And it appeared in application to USDA programs for the very first time in the 2018 Farm Bill. That law's been around for over 40 years. That had never applied to USDA until 2018. And you heard some great discussion from both Joe Van Alstyne of the Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indians and Ali Hard from FNS yesterday about how that 638 project is going in the nutrition programming for FDIPR, the Food Distribution Program on Indian reservations. But expanding that is definitely a coalition priority to other areas of the Farm Bill and also to other nutrition programs within the nutrition title. Expanding technical assistance access for Native producers is also a key priority of the Native Farm Bill Coalition. Big example there is fully funding with non-competitive funding the federally recognized Tribal Extension Program, or FERTEP. I can see Lexi fist pumping over there because she loves the FERTEP. That makes sure that Native producers have access to the technical assistance that they need to access USDA programs robustly. FERTEP also supports Native youth in agriculture through 4-H and other activities, so making sure that that's fully funded is certainly a priority. And of course, overall, over all 12 titles, making sure that those programs are developed by and for Native people, that Native voices are strongly heard in the process of the Farm Bill, that there are opportunities like the Tribal Advisory Committee for tribes to have direct input and tribal citizens to have direct input into making USDA programs work better for you. So with that, let's talk about the nutrition title. I don't have a favorite title of the Farm Bill, but this is my favorite title. Thank you for laughing. You missed that on a Zoom screen, and you're kind of like, is that joke landing? I don't know. Maybe not. The nutrition title includes a lot of different, obviously, nutrition programs. The one you'll hear about most often in Farmville debates is, of course, SNAP. It's the largest part of the nutrition title and the largest part of the funding of the nutrition title, but there are so many other programs in the nutrition title. And I'm going to start with FDIPR, the Food Distribution Program on Indian reservations, or you may know it affectionately or not as CMODS. I mentioned the 638 program for FDIPR, and expanding that or making it permanent is a priority for 2023 for the coalition. If you heard Ali speak yesterday from FNS, she had a question from Pigeonhole about potentially expanding this program and rightly noted that although FNS may support that, and I was excited to hear that may be true, Congress has to act to make that happen. So Congress would need to make that change in the Farm Bill to make that procurement provision permanent, or to expand the 638 authority to enable tribal governments to take over the full operation of FDIPR. Reducing the matching requirement that tribes must pay to participate in FDIPR is also a priority for the coalition. That was true in 2018, and it's true again in 2023. The original ask from the coalition in 2018 was 0, and that's the starting point for 2023 as well. If you didn't know, to operate a FDIPR program, tribes are required to make a match. Previously, it was 25%, and currently it's 20%. There was a 5% reduction in the 18 bill, but the goal was 0, and so that's the priority again for 2023. Continuing that new nutrition education funding that FNS has been able to work with Congress to get for FDIPR is also a priority. Ali mentioned that yesterday, I believe, as well, so you will have heard about that if you were here at her session. FDIPR's nutrition education funding has been kind of stagnant from Congress over the last 10 to 20 years, so increasing opportunities for FDIPR sites to have nutrition education funding, because they do have that face-to-face interaction with tribal citizens who are participating in FDIPR, making them a fantastic point for nutrition education that's Indigenous-led, but getting them funding is the real kicker, and that can come through the Farm Bill, so that's a priority as well. Also creating a pilot program for locally sourced or locally produced herbs and spices for FDIPR as part of nutrition education opportunities, not necessarily as part of the food package. Who likes to eat food that tastes good? Yeah. So having herbs and spices is a great way to make your food taste good. And if you were listening yesterday, we were talking about mint and how refreshing that is and how that can be a traditional medicine as well. It also makes food taste good. But it's hard to include those in USDA food packages because calorically speaking, they don't add a lot of energy necessarily, just make food taste good, make you feel better. But you can do that through nutrition education programming, and the Farm Bill could create a pilot program that would enable sourcing of herbs and spices, particularly from tribal producers. There are also a couple of other provisions for FDIPR that I did want to discuss too. One of them is infrastructure dollars for FDIPR. FDIPR's been around since the 1970s. It was sort of piloted in 1973 and then fully launched in the 1977 Farm Bill. And there hasn't been a significant influx in infrastructure dollars until recently with the CARES Act. Really, before then it had been 2008 since there had been infrastructure money that Congress has appropriated to allow tribes to do necessary upgrades to warehouse facilities, making sure things are ADA compliant, installing ramps, having more cooler space or refrigerated space, especially for FDIPR sites that want to transition to a storefront model. All of those things are infrastructure upgrades, and Congress could appropriate a significant amount to bring FDIPR sites some more infrastructure dollars that would enable them to do those upgrades. And of course, including more tribally and regionally produced foods for FDIPR. Doing that on a regional basis is pretty important, especially when we're talking about traditional or culturally appropriate foods. A lot of those foods don't have a national market, or if they do, sometimes if you're sourcing for FDIPR and sourcing across the country and providing that food to every single FDIPR site, even if it's not a culturally appropriate food for that site, that buys up a lot of the available product on the market, and it can reduce the availability of that food for people within the tribal community for whom that is actually a traditional food. So that's happened in the past with wild rice, it's happened with bison. The goal that tribal leaders, when they've been talking to USDA about getting more traditional food into FDIPR, is to do it on a regional basis. And that way, the foods that are traditional in the food packages are actually traditional for that area. Bison is delicious, but it's not necessarily a traditional food for someone in the Pacific Northwest. So making sure that those products are available and sourced on a culturally appropriate and regional basis is a priority that tribal leaders have articulated, and that will be a coalition priority for 2023. There's more to the nutrition title than FDPR as well, so I wanted to also talk about a couple of other things in the nutrition title for 2023. Expanding tribal parity, again, and the recognition of tribal sovereignty is kind of the fundamental root of a lot of the other priorities in the nutrition title for 2023. That includes tribal eligibility to administer the SNAP program, or what was formerly called food stamps. Currently, outside of a really complicated regulatory framework, it is almost impossible for tribes to thread the needle and actually administer SNAP outside of a state agency, and it still requires a lot of coordination and partnership with state agencies, and because of that, only a handful of tribes have actually gone through that process to fully administer a SNAP program, so it's still mostly administered by state agencies. So the Farm Bill would need to make a legal change that adds tribes, again, recognizing tribal sovereignty, recognizing parity, and adds tribes to the authorizing or administering entities for SNAP, and that would enable direct tribal administration of that program without going through that really complicated current regulatory framework. Tribal eligibility for SNAP Ed funding could come alongside that. That would open up tribal opportunities to draw from the SNAP Ed nutrition education funding that states are allocated. It's a huge pool of money, but tribes are not directly able to access those. Tribes have to go through states. So making that change in the Farm Bill would eliminate the need for tribes to essentially subjugate their sovereignty to states and access that pool of funding directly. 6 through to 8 authority for SNAP is another opportunity for tribal administration of SNAP, but in an even more robust way, and that is a priority for 2023 and really for all the nutrition title programs. The dual use of SNAP and FDPR is another priority for 2023. If you didn't know, if a family qualifies for both SNAP and FDPR currently, they cannot use both programs in the same month. There's a statutory prohibition on that. And that's not true of SNAP and almost any other program you can think of in the federal food assistance suite of programs. If you qualify for both SNAP and the Emergency Food Assistance Program, you can use both. If you qualify for SNAP and WIC, you can use both, but it doesn't apply to SNAP and FDPR. You have to make a decision if you qualify for both. So the dual use of SNAP and FDPR would be important. And in that provision, I do want to note, because I want to make sure that the FDPR folks know they've been heard on this. This is not an indication that people need to transition off of FDPR into SNAP or vice versa. All this does is give people more options. It also eliminates the certification rigmarole that tribes have to go through. Hey, and thank you. It also eliminates the certification battle that tribes have to go through, calling a state agency to decertify households from SNAP and then certify for FDPR if they want to move between programs. So just making things a little administratively easier. And lastly, tribal eligibility to administer TFAP. That's the Emergency Food Assistance Program. Tribes are not currently legal entities that are allowed to administer that program. That should be changed in the law in the 2023 Farm Bill to open up that access so that tribes have that option as well. And then, of course, the expansion of more tribally produced and tribally procured foods in all nutrition programs is, again, a 2023 priority for the Native Farm Bill Coalition. And that includes potentially a cooperative agreement authority for tribal food procurement in all of the nutrition title programs. That cooperative agreement authority would give both tribes and USDA a little bit more flexibility in sourcing tribally produced foods. It could look a little bit like the recent Agricultural Marketing Service, or AMS, local food cooperative purchasing program that was offering money either to tribes or states to then source food for tribes from native producers and put that food into programs that serve low-income tribal citizens, whether that's a senior or elder care program or FDPR or other food assistance programs. That was a way to get tribally procured food into USDA programs without going through a really complicated regulatory process that's called vendor certification. It takes a long time and can be a big barrier to Native businesses getting into the door to sell food to USDA. So that would kind of circumvent that process and facilitate a lot more locally produced and tribally produced foods in USDA programs. And I know I said I was just going to talk about the nutrition title, but you guys know I couldn't just talk about the nutrition title, right? There's 11 other titles. I just want to give you a really snapshot of some of the things that are included in the other titles, and hopefully make you excited enough to come to a roundtable and hear about the entire Farm Bill from our team as we travel around the country this summer, talking to producers and tribal leaders and tribal community members and change makers all across Indian country. So there's support for Native producers, of course, is at the core of the work that we do in the Native Farm Bill Coalition, adding Buy Indian requirements to USDA programs, making sure that that law that's only currently applicable to BIA and IHS programs would also be applicable to USDA, encouraging USDA anytime they're sourcing food to look first to a Native vendor as the original stewards of land on this continent, and improving credit access for Native producers as well is a huge priority and continues to be. It was in the last Farm Bill and it will be again. And once more, I can't say it enough, just increasing parity for tribes. I mentioned the specialty crop block grant program before, but also expansion of the 638 forestry program that was also included in the 2018 Farm Bill. All of those are priorities. And this is a really good time to be talking about this because Farm Bill hearings have already started. They started earlier this year with the House Ag Committee back in February and have continued since then, doing a 2022 look at the 2018 Farm Bill and thinking about priorities legislatively for 2023. There's also been some support already for 638 for SNAP. Both Senator Smith from here in Minnesota co-sponsored a bill with Senator Rounds from South Dakota last year on 638 for SNAP, and Representative Neguse from California on the House side also sponsored some bills that indicated support for 638 for SNAP, so we were excited to see that. The Senate Ag Committee has also been working. They held a field hearing in Michigan for Senator Stabenow, who's the chairman of the Senate Ag Committee, and Senator Bozeman, who's the ranking member, will hold one later this year in Arkansas. That's to be determined right now. And even though these committees don't have jurisdiction over the Farm Bill, won't be writing the Farm Bill necessarily, they do have members who sit on the Ag and Appropriations Committees, so it's also been good to see the U.S. Senate Committee on Indian Affairs holding hearings on Buy Native American, and the U.S. House Rules Committee holding a hearing on Indigenous nutrition. I know, me too, bud. Talking about Congress, I mean, what can you do? So hopefully that has whet your appetite for more Farm Bill talk. And if you want to stay involved with the Native Farm Bill Coalition, do I have news for you? We're probably coming to somewhere near you or directly in your tribal community. And if we're not, we would love to. We have a roundtable extravaganza that our team is embarking on starting in June. I'm glad they're excited. They're going to be literally road tripping, starting in Alaska at Anchorage at NCAI's mid-year conference in June, then flying to the Pacific Northwest and starting to trek from the Pacific Northwest all the way across the country to Washington, D.C. So plenty of opportunities for us to host roundtable dialogues. The roundtable dialogues are such a pivotal part of this process. I want you to think of us as like your legal mechanics at IFAI. We are the people who, if your car isn't running well, and by your car I mean food systems, so this is kind of a tortured metaphor and I'm sorry about that, but I am going to go with it. I'm going to commit. If your food system's not working for you, we want to be the people that you come to. We want to be the mechanics that you pull up and you pop the hood and we look at the Farm Bill and we go, how do we make a change here that makes this work better for you? So these roundtables are an excellent place to dialogue with us as coalition members and just problem solvers for Indian country food and ag to figure out how we make that car run smoother for you. So please come to a roundtable if you have an opportunity. If you haven't got one scheduled in your community, we'd love to work with you to do that. They're free. We'll host them for free. We'll come to you for free. You don't have to do anything except show up and dialogue. That's it, just talking, which I'm clearly very good at. Our 22 events are also all on our website, which is the nativefarmbill.com. So that's pretty easy to remember, nativefarmbill.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So, and these slides will make them available on the website as well, and we can make them available to the conference organizers as well to share with you. So if you didn't get a picture of this now, we'll make sure that you get access to them later. And this is me, in case you want to keep in touch with me for any reason and hear me complain, I guess, about Congress, since I've done that already this morning. No, I'm really, really grateful to be here, and I know I've got about a minute left for questions. So if anybody has Pigeonhole questions, I would love to hear them. Thank you all.